Good morning and Jai Hind. Good afternoon, in fact. We meet after lunch, and I promise we'll keep you awake for the next half an hour. I would be today, yesterday we had two sessions on space. One was the session of the startups, what is next in space, and then we had our minister himself speaking about space when he had an interaction here in the evening. Today, we'll again talk of space, and this is primarily from the angle of the bigger companies in India in communication and launch vehicles. We'll also look at something new what is happening in defense, and that is the unarmed vehicles and the drones, which in recent times have brought a revolution. And in fact, my friend from Russia, who's been seeing the war intimately, and along with Ankit, who's here in India, we'll get an insight into how is this domain going to develop in the world and in India, specifically in the defense domain. But just to talk a little about, at the cost of repetition, about space in India. India's space forays or journey started in 1963 with a rocket which was given to us by the Americans, the payload which was given to us by the French, and I'm told at Thumba it was carried by a Russian helicopter. From there to where we reached last year has been a significant journey led by the Indian Space Research Organization in India. And last year, after Chandrayaan-4, that was the landing on the southern pole of the moon, it was space docking, which was carried out just a month back. While ISRO has achieved all this, the Indian government took a very significant decision in June 2020, and in the words of the minister himself, unshackling of space for the private sector. And what it did was opened up private sector in space, and that is where the new space journey in India started. And in just 4 years, many of them have really achieved significant milestones. There are two companies who have had their suborbital launch. There are 5 startups and companies who have launched their own private satellites. And there's a large number of companies working in applications. But in the ISRO story, for a long time, there were companies in India, big companies in India, which had no profit, were suppliers of components, engines, and even large parts of the rocket. So the first person I would like to talk to today is Mr. Jayant Patil. And Mr. Jayant Patil has been in space nearly as much as old space has been in India, ISRO has been there. He was there right from the beginning, and then on with Larsen and Toubro, he's also taken on the defense section of L&T, which from 1985, when he made the forays, to 2002, when defense was opened to private companies, he was there to get the door opened. And what a journey it has been. And in 2020, again, he was given the task to lead the Indian Space Association, which he formed. And also, he's the member of a new organization called the Indian Space Promotion and Authorization Organization called InSpace, which is responsible for everything what the private space does. So, Mr. Patil, I would like you to talk about what has happened in the last 40 years and what has changed in 2020.
Great and a very open-ended but an interesting question. My memory goes to the days when the space sector was in absolute infancy. And you're absolutely right, our space rockets used to be carried on a bicycle carrier. The first Indian experiments in terms of space dates back to 1918. It is 107 years back. Somebody in India thought that the space is going to be relevant. 1963, what you talked of is the government actually recognizing that something very strategic need to be done, and that was creation of ISRO. In the current form as ISRO exists, came up in 1969. 71 onwards, ISRO realized that to do something of that class, they need dedicated production centers. And this was the beginning of the journey of India's apartheid in terms of technology. So 1974 onwards, when India did not get any technology from anywhere, anything and everything for space had to be designed, developed, including raw materials, including processes and procedures indigenously. So this entire history of, let's say, 1971, when we engaged with ISRO as a very small company. Larsen & Toubro is big today, but I can tell you that in 1971, we were less than 10-15 crore size company, and ISRO decided to take us as a partner for building the rockets. And the exacting standards of what ISRO has been able to achieve at a completely different price point has been the contribution of Indian minds right from scientific domain to an industrial domain. And of course, this journey has seen that as Indian space, we probably beaten every possible benchmark in the world in terms of largest number of satellites on a launch, the most cost-effective space launch systems that we created. And when the rest of the world would burn fuel to keep going to the moon, we found the slingshot mechanisms where you can use the gravity to go to the moon. So lots of our missions in terms of space obviously have been, the way Prime Minister has already quoted this, to be less than a rickshaw fare that you paid as of that day to go for the same distance. You would probably pay more to a rickshaw than to go to a moon or to reach Mars. So this has been an amazing space journey. But the flip side of it is our space program remained civil. And as a civil, it necessarily meant that you are going to be doing things for the mankind. You're going things for serving the people of not only this country, but the friendly nations around. And towards that, the commerce element of what we were doing as a part of space was extremely small. And this is something which, during the COVID period, and a lot of us believe that COVID gave some amazing opportunities because you couldn't meet people, you couldn't go out, you actually search within lots of solutions in terms of what India did, came in that era of thinking. And this thinking era made sure that the space was open. So the space sector opening as an idea to sort of 2002 defense, rest of the economy had opened in 91, 92. 10 years later came defense, another 20 years later came the space opening. And we know now as a part of the opening of the space sector, the amazing things that are happening. There was a time when ISRO used to do 2 launches a year. This is an era we see. There are 25, 30 launches happening every year. Number of missions are on the increase. The services end of it, leveraging what India does about the IT and the IT-enabled services in terms of using our software capabilities to be able to build completely different solutions to help the mankind. So in the space commerce, typically 75 to 80% has nothing to do with making a satellite or launching a satellite. It's all about services. And these services can mean surveillance, it can mean communication, it can mean various different levels of analytics to be able to create. And this is an era, multiple wars in last couple of years brought in, and that's where to some extent, what we call as the defense space started becoming an extremely important part and emerged as a separate era and a separate kind of domain. You realize that you can acquire, why launch a satellite if you can hack a satellite and take it over? And this is essentially where the hardware that you put into space now needed to be of a completely different kind, a completely trustable electronics, and this trustable electronics being built with an ability that it can never be hacked or cannot be taken over. And this is the direction in which we see now lots of our defense space challenges focus on. Defense space challenges, when they were put up to the Prime Minister and we readily agreed and said, the 75, we will open it to the industry to compete. But for the same 75 challenges, we know the challenges which are at component level, the challenges which actually sort of telescope into a complete systems, and the systems completely sort of telescope into platforms, and then the platforms which are unhackable. Assured data availability, non-denial of that data to the user is becoming the kind of a norm, and this is essentially where lots of these new initiatives which the Prime Minister announced, and thereafter, of course, you've been part of that journey all along the day we created the Indian Space Association. We were all tasked by the Prime Minister at that point in time that this is a new sector. It has its own unique challenges. It has 100% been government controlled. And from that environment, if you have to create a group of people, similar thinking, your own ecosystem, create an ecosystem, grow the ecosystem, and I think this is exactly what, as ISPA we keep doing. When you start completely deregulating, there was a need of a promoter and an authorizer. This is an amazing model, and I can say that none other than Prime Minister Modi could think of it, that a regulator is made a promoter. It is unprecedented in Indian history that there is any regulator who has a job to promote, and this is exactly what is a very complex role which he allocated to InSpace to do, and many things happening. We are actually seeing that daily and every month when we meet, there are newer and newer things which are happening. And it shows an enormous amount of promise. There's a decadal vision which has been put into place. 2023, when this vision was being talked about, for 2032, where we reach from 2% of the global space commerce that happens from India, the focus is to cross 10% as in 2032. And that means tens of times of growth of this sector. And this is essentially what the new space sector in India will actually do.
So three very significant things Mr. Patil has mentioned. One, this new organization in India called InSpace, which is the promoter and regulator. Mostly, traditionally, promoters and regulators are separate. But here it was thought to try this experiment, and it is working very well. The second was the creation of 75 defense space challenges. And for this, we have to thank Mr. Patil, because when in MOD the case was put up, what would be space in Amrit Kal in 2047? That is what triggered these 75 defense challenges, which are basically the aspiration of the Indian Armed Forces for the future. And the government, what they have decided is, one, they've spelled out what do they want in the future. Two, they have given grants for that. And the grants vary from 1 crore to 10 crore to 25 crore, depending on which kind of project it is. And this has also worked very well and brought a lot of excitement amongst our startups. Well, I'll leave space here for the moment, and let us go to see what is happening in warfare in future. And to have that, the start point would be an expert from Russia. He's from a think tank, and of course, his area of domain is strategy and economy. But I would like to ask him a little about defense. What does he feel? What are the changes which are coming? And how does he see, what are the new defense developments any nation requires to do?
Thank you very much, General. First of all, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very grateful to organizers for inviting me and bringing to such panel. I think that the world economy and international system is entering into the new phase of arms race, which is developing in different spheres. In the sphere of technology, in the sphere of military economics, and is in the sphere of broader thinking. Because during decades, during the Cold War and aftermath, a lot of innovations have been coming from military sphere to civil sector, and it was spin-off. Now we see more and more spin-ons when civil innovations and civil systems are developing together with military systems or taken to the military sphere by producers of weaponry systems. And I think that this trend is also combining with two features, combining in itself two features. On the one hand, military technology is becoming more and more complicated. We see that together with development of unmanned air and maritime systems, with elements of artificial intelligence, together with development of air systems of 5 generations and upper, together with development of space surveillance systems, of space intelligence systems, of systems of command and control, the war is becoming more and more technological. But at the same time, and Russian-Ukrainian conflict has proved it in many dimensions, the most effective technologies are the cheapest. And on the international markets of military goods, of arms and ammunition, the more competitive producers are, the cheaper and more effective the vehicles they are bringing to the market are becoming. And on the one hand, we see that the United States, China, to a high extent Russia, India, some European producers are moving very fastly towards very, very complicated systems such as hypersonics, both ballistic systems and air gliding systems, together with new systems of space domain, as I mentioned before, command, control, intelligence, and also using elements of artificial intelligence. High-precision weapons are developing fastly, drones and unmanned systems. But at the same time, I believe that in next 20, 30 years, a lot of very traditional military technologies, but with usage of these new technological developments and achievements, will be highly required on markets of weapons. And we have seen it during Russian-Ukrainian conflicts, how Soviet, very old systems of 70s and 80s, modified with new electronics, command and control systems, with new systems of geo-orientation and others, can be used 20, 50 times more effective than they used to be when they have been produced. I believe that for Indo-Pacific region, the most significant systems will be interconnected with air and sea battlefields. And here we can also see a very significant progress of both offensive and defensive systems. And I believe that those countries which will develop effective missile defense system for theater or for broader scale air defense systems, and at the same time will have effective and cheap air offensive capabilities, together with maritime capabilities, will be the winners of this competition, hopefully not of the war. Thank you.
I totally agree with your last statement. And of course, you have comprehensively talked of all the domains, but one word which has repeatedly come is technology and cheap. And here is one thing which has come with this technology and cheap. And that is where I will go to the next speaker, Ankit. Ankit, you started with UAVs or drones much before any wars were in the horizon, 2004. And maybe many people were not even interested in what you were producing, to today, where you literally, this new weapon system or the new device has become so potent for surveillance, for precision strikes, and one advantage it gives over traditional system is the cost. And it has developed in multi. I want you to start from zero when you started, and what did you anticipate it would be, and how and where it is, and what do you think Idea Forge will do. Before that, I would like to tell you, Ankit, an IITian from Bombay, leads one of the best drone companies in India, Idea Forge. And they've been into it from 2004 to 2008 and are the biggest suppliers to defense, to security agencies, and even for private use all over India. Over to you, Ankit.
Thank you so much, sir. In terms of our origin, I think we built our... Yeah. So we built our first drone in 2004. It was more a fun activity. But in 2008, when attacks happened in Mumbai, and we saw that naval helicopters are trying to look at the third and fourth floor of the Taj Hotel, we felt like our drones should have been doing that job instead of risking something so obvious, so close to the adversary. We should have had these drones which would not have even been seen or heard while still observing the target. So that's how our journey began, to wanting to build technology for our defense forces and for our civil forces who are engaged in such events. 2009, we launched our first drone for doing, a backpack operated drone that can be launched and can do this kind of activity. And 2010 is when we made our first sales in India to one of the special forces for one of our states. And over the years now, our technology is absorbed by pretty much all of the defense forces and the internal security forces, and also we do applications around civil side, around mapping, etc. So one of the very important things that we realized very early on is that India is a very complex geography, particularly if we have any conflict with our adversaries. Most of that conflict is going to happen in environment which is not very plains kind of environment. It is hilly environment, it is very high altitude environment. So we were very clear from day one that if India needs a solution, then India needs a solution that can be vertical takeoff and landing insofar as drones is concerned. So from very beginning, we have done that. In fact, when we were in the early stages of our development and the country was asking for technology that was hand-launched drones, which are typical fixed-wing drones that need some kind of airspace to take off and land from, we actually went against the grain and built the country's first VTOL fixed-wing hybrid, which would take off like a helicopter, transition into an aircraft and come back and land, being lighter than any of our competition while also performing better than them. So I think technology and the challenges that our country throws to us are very, very unique. And if we build for that, we have confidence that we can use it anywhere in the world, because in no other place is that high an altitude available where operations need to be done. In no other country, maybe low temperatures are available, but this combination is not available. And very high temperatures and marine, all three we have to tackle simultaneously while we are planning to build a platform. So I think in India, building this technology has been a privilege. And now that we go outside the country and we demonstrate our technology, we can see that it is capable of weathering those conditions and is able to operate in that environment. I think if we look at the future, then what's going to happen now in this technology particularly is that learning from all the wars, resilience is going to be the most important vector when somebody wants to induct this technology. So while there is a desire to be cheaper, it will also have to come in the context of being effective. And therefore, resilience is going to be very critical. The other thing which is obvious to us when we are observing what's happening out there is that tactics is getting copied very fast. If one side is doing something, the other side is very quickly copying that. And therefore, the only advantage that can sustain is a technological advantage on performance. And therefore, having very high performing systems that are not easy to replicate, as easy as tactics is, it's going to be very critical going forward. And last but not the least, in my opinion, it's going to be very important that, like what our friend from Russia mentioned, systems will have to be modern and upgradable in situ. Because if tactics have to be copied as well, systems have to be upgraded in situ so that they can deliver something meaningful. So getting AI on the edge, getting compute on the edge, having modularity in the systems, many of these things may actually make systems more complex, more expensive. But at the same time, they will reduce the cost of war, because when the war happens, you will have the ability to sustain them for longer and have them be more effective for longer. So I think the view has to evolve from looking at merely cost to cost of war. And we have to optimize for a lower cost of war, all of us. If at all, we have to get into one.
Okay, the best case, of course, would be both technology and cost. Yes. But very rightly you said technology will cost something. It can't be cheap. But one issue which we see in the supply chain, and there's been an article recently also, that kind of drones which were supplied had components of a country where we would not like to get our supplies from. Is there really a problem, or there is a lot of noise about it? And are complete Indian solutions available in this industry or not?
So I think that's a great question. I think I would like to divide this answer into three parts. The first part is the quest of critical technologies. I think anything that has data in its chain should be, any of the, adversaries that we might be on the border looking at, right? Second is strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy is very critical, and we have to probably move away from strategic autonomy to strategic superiority, if I may. And last but not the least is the question of indigenization, where we want to retain as much as possible the dollars in our own country, right? So I think these three have to be looked at. I think at least what the government has adopted, even if it is from us or from other people, most of the tech may not have any critical subsystem coming from our adversary, which is the main concern, which was also highlighted in some of these invents. Having strategic autonomy goes beyond merely these subsystems. Strategic autonomy is wanting to have these such that nobody can impose sanctions on us and we can build what we want to build. That is exactly, we should be able to build even if there is denial. And I think that is something that will take more time. Indigenization percentage is definitely in majority of the cases, at least perhaps for us at least, is above the thresholds that have been defined of what needs to be done. Can we ever have fully indigenous solutions? Maybe not, because eventually the question will come down to whether we have the mines or not. But as I think we have to have a very nuanced conversation in a global world where we have to just make sure that we are protected and we don't make obvious mistakes, and we work towards making sure that rest of the supply chain and systems are at the right environment in the right place.
Thank you, Ankit. Another thing we saw from the recent wars was the use of private space. And this was a very unique thing which happened during the Ukraine war, where when communication of one of Ukraine broke down, that was provided by a private company in America. All of us know the name of that company, Starlink, which could provide satellites and connections for the communication to go up. So this is a new dimension, and again, in ISR, the same thing happened, that it was private companies which were providing ISR, the latest and the best to both the sides, and a little bit more to one side maybe. Now, this new dimension of commercialization of space, and especially communication going from geosynchronous to the low Earth orbit, was a new dimension. Now, if India faces such a challenge, fortunately we have a company which is there in India and is ready to provide low Earth orbit services very soon. And Nishtha is the regional director of that. And Nishtha, over to you to tell us the story of Eutelsat OneWeb. How have you come up? What are you doing at the moment? And in the future, what are you going to do with the Indian Defence Forces, if at all you are planning anything?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and very good afternoon. And many congratulations to the organizing committee for putting up this wonderful show, which is absolutely forward-looking. So I am representing Eutelsat OneWeb, which is the company only company in the world which has its own GEO and LEO constellation. So we have our own low Earth orbit constellation of more than 600 odd satellites, which is covering an entire world. We are already active in 80 plus countries, and India, we are ready to go live as soon as we get spectrum allocation done. So low Earth orbit is of course not new, but now the hype, because everybody in the industry, everybody in the defense sector is also realizing that's the next thing to go to. So just for an example, US has put up only $30 billion only for LEO related service, and the connectivity piece is the $13 billion. That kind of an investment has started happening in this particular connectivity as a solution. So when we say low Earth orbit, it is just at 1200 kilometers is where our satellites are moving. So what it brings is the high speed and reduces the latency. Now the latency is the key USP for all the real-time applications, all the ISR, the C4, what any defense entire world is looking for. So when we are talking we are living in the VUCA world, what we are saying, or the geopolitical tensions around the globe, as a country, we need to secure ourselves. And for the security, it's a very simple thing. When even in our homes, we have to have our lock first in place, and whatever we do inside. That's a simple analogy that first we need to build our connectivity around and protect our nations. And connectivity in today's time is the most important thing. We cannot leave even a corner of the country, of the nation, unconnected. LEO brings that power, or it empowers the nation, because like say, if we just put a terrestrial, you cannot take fiber to every place. Like my friend was saying, it's hilly terrains, and India has a complex territorial geographies. So how can you put a fiber everywhere? And that's where comes the satellite. And even in that satellite, GEO will not be able to provide, and then comes the low Earth orbit satellites as a solution. We have just a small laptop size of a terminal.
I'll request you to wrap up in 30 seconds.
We have to, okay, yes, we have overshot the time. But that's where we are coming up. And I think for the defense, our most important role is to secure the nation. And connectivity through LEO satellite is one of the very, very important, critical, and a key aspect in today's time.
Thank you, Nishtha. And before we finish, because the organizers have threatened me twice, any last word from any of the speakers? Just for a quick 30 seconds or 1 minute.
I think India today is at a cusp at which the thinking is going to decide what we'll do. And that true confidence in positioning for that kind of a very important place becomes extremely important. And this is essentially what Ankit said about the migration from strategic autonomy to strategic superiority. We have to get into that mindset to be superior to whom we are dealing with, and I think that's the way forward.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and what is now left is to thank all the panelists. So nice of you to have given your views, and on behalf of NXT, I thank you all for this excellent session. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that illuminating discussion. You were talking about what's next in defense, and we move on to another tenet, another pillar of what democracies run on and what democracies are all about. We'll be discussing what is next in law. Can I please invite upon stage